Hi, and welcome to Born Again Quilts Restoration Studio here in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I'm Lois Eubank, the owner, and today I have as my guest Terry and this wonderful victim here on my autopsy table that we are about to investigate. Terry, what can you tell me about this victim?
Well, this is a quilt that I received from my grandmother. This is Kitty Doyle. Catherine is her real name, and Kitty died at the age of 99 on July 14th, 1992. At the time, I was married, and my son was 1 week short of his first birthday, and I felt so lucky to have her in my life for so long. Her parents were William and Eleanor O'Brien. Her maiden name was Hamill. And her mother's maiden name was Hamill, I'm sorry, and she had only one brother, Harry O'Brien. She married Jerry Doyle in 1926. His first wife had 3 children, 3 girls, Mary, Helen, and Anne, but only Helen is living. And Jerry and Kitty, when they married, had 3 daughters, one of which is my mother. Those 3 girls were Eleanor, Nora, and Patricia, and my mother, Nora, and her sister Pat are still living. My grandmother lived at Snyder Memorial Nursing Home in Reedsburg, Wisconsin until she died. And we all wanted her to live to be 100. I think she wanted to too, but she didn't quite make it. Every summer we would visit Grandma Kitty at her house at North Park Street in Reedsburg, Wisconsin. All of my mother's sisters and their husbands and their children, my cousins, we all would get together. There were only, I think, 3 summers that we didn't make it, and that was when we lived in Germany. Now, this particular quilt was located in the den, which was off the dining room and off the bathroom. And in this den, there was a bed, and this was a place where all the grandkids played. There was a piano we pounded on, a huge walk-in closet. But this quilt was where we would take naps and play, and it brings a lot of fond memories to me. So after her death, some years after her death, my Aunt Pat asked me if I wanted the quilt, and I was thrilled. And I'm not sure exactly when that was. I think it was, 6, 8, 10 years ago. And so to me, the quilt embodies my grandmother and her love for us and for her children and grandchildren. When I married, I used the wedding ring quilt as my theme. And so quilts have always been very important to me. And I think quilts symbolize a lot about a person, and they're a living heirloom that I just treasure a lot. So I would like to thank Lois for restoring this quilt, and I plan to take very good care of it until I'm no longer around and pass it on to my family. And I am sure it will be in good hands, and we will all treasure the memories of Grandma Kitty as well as the quilt. Now I do want to say my grandmother did not make the quilt. She was a seamstress. She sewed, and she made us pajamas and clothing. And she also went blind in one eye from glaucoma, but to my knowledge, she was never a quilter. So I think it's important to say that. And my full name is Therese Chioy Milbauer, and I go by Terry with a Y. Thanks for having me today here, Lois, and I'm eager to hear more about the quilt.
Well, Terry, as you may or may not know, this is a very common quilt pattern of quilts from the Depression era. This is what is known as grandmother's flower garden, and what would be more fitting since it came from your grandmother. And how it gets its name is because these are like the flowers, and then the green becomes the path in between the different flowers. And you can also tell that it's a very scrappy quilt, but at the same time you can see that your grandma happened to have a lot of the same fabric. Not each one of these is different. You see many of the same fabrics over and over again. That kind of tells me that the person who did make it probably did a lot of home sewing, probably made dresses, aprons, and you can also tell, again, being the Depression era, that thrift was part of the family, that she probably took her leftover fabrics to create this quilt. The other thing, though, is she certainly had enough money to buy enough of the green fabric to incorporate the whole thing. So I would say this is somebody who was a Depression era person, but they were not, I'm not going to say they were well-to-do, but they were not, they were kind of well off. They were able to buy fabric to make clothes, which means they weren't buying them, which would have been more expensive, but yet they had the money to find the fabric to make the clothes, which is a really nice thing. Because of that, you have this really great quilt. Now, when I examined this quilt, the one thing that I did notice is that the pink fabrics in it, as you can tell by all of my safety pins, mark the different gardens, flower gardens that are in really bad shape, that again you have chosen to replace them rather than keeping them in a tattered and torn condition. So what Terry and I did was we looked at both reproduction and vintage fabric to determine what fabric would be the best to restore it. And because of the different fabrics needing to be restored, we came up with a plan to use both vintage and reproduction fabric. Say for instance, and this is what I would call my skin grafts. These are the replacement pieces for the flower gardens. Say for instance, this one over here in the red, as you can see, every single one of the hexagons is like totally pretty much obliterated. But the red center is in very fine condition. So this is vintage fabric that will be used to replace and honor what was there before by using a very similar fabric in terms of its color and the scale of the print on it. Now for other parts, say these pink ones, you can see that there are many, many, many of the pinks. I think I cut out well over 100 hexagons to replace all of the pink ones. And because of the number needed, it was more difficult to find enough pink fabric in that volume to use vintage fabric. So we turned to reproduction fabric. Now one thing about restoration is that sometimes you can do what Grandma did and make it a little bit even better than what Grandma did. And the reason I say that is if you look at these pink ones here, you notice that the centers are pink and the print is also pink. So having the pink on pink, they don't pop like this purple one pops, or this blue one, or the red one. There's just not enough contrast there. So what Terry and I decided to do was to find a reproduction 30s, 40s print that would honor what was there, but yet at the same time bring a little bit more color to them so that they too can shine rather than just being kind of like in the background. This print, as you can tell, has the same color of green, a little bit of it, as the pathway, and it just has a little bit darker pink that'll give it a little bit more pizzazz. Terry, what did you think of that color choice there?
You know, I was thinking about this quilt as you were getting ready, and I realized that this shade of green and the colors in that ring, those hexagons, I've always been extremely fond of them, so it just seems like it's supposed to be. Like it was meant to be that we would pick those colors to replace it, and I'm just really excited that the color matching just turned out so well. And the day I came up here to help her choose the fabrics, I just felt really pleased and content, and it just felt right. And I think if my grandma was here, she'd be very excited, and she would compliment us on doing a good job. So
she's smiling down from heaven on us both. The other thing that has a challenge with this quilt is, and it's pretty normal, that on most quilts the first thing to show a lot of wear is going to be the binding. And as you can see, this binding is challenging, and so of course Terry wanted to have that replaced as well. Well, if we examine the fabric on the binding, we notice that the same fabric is used throughout the quilt as well, and also has its challenges here in the florets. So for that fabric, this is what's going to replace them. So that again, it's bringing out the oranges, the golds, the greens. So again, it's honoring what Grandma did, but yet at the same time, it'll be back in place. And let's face it, quilting is a recyclable art. If this was still in the owner's, the original maker's possession, and she saw that it was ripped, she'd be the first person going to the rag bag to pick up something to put it in place. In this case, we're just not just picking out any old fabric, we're doing something that's going to fit in and complement what was there. Now Terry, what's going to happen next with your quilt? Now that hundreds of these ringlets have been made to replace the ones that are needing to be replaced, you notice here we have several in a row. So what I'm going to be doing next is very meticulously picking out the quilting from these, And I'm not only going to do the ringlets, I'm also going to do the path in between. And then what will happen is I have to be very careful, because obviously what may have been quilted here may have been quilted from here and then quilted over to this one. So I need to make sure that I knot off, kind of suture these, so that they're protected and that the thread isn't left loose there. Then what I'm going to do is I am going to undo then these by sections, so that I'm going to take out 4 in a row, with including the ones that are in between. Then I'll take those in between, attach them to, take out the ones that have good circles or make new circles, put them in, reattach the green, so that I can put this whole thing in as one big piece, rather than trying to individually replace them piece block by block by block. So it'll be more expeditious to do it that way. So now that it's spring, this will be something that I'll be working on as far as now picking them apart. And what I'll probably do is do a section and then quilt it in, do another section and quilt it in. So I hope to see you back here in maybe a couple of months, and I will show you the progress on your quilt.
That's terrific. Thank you so much.
Well, I hope that this will go well, and I want to thank you for joining us. Again, this is Lois Eubank from Born Again Quilts. You can watch the progress of this quilt and other quilts on the website at www.bornagainquilts.com. Happy quilting!